Thank you for coming, everybody. I'm Anna Summers-Cox. I started the art newspaper 26 years ago, and I'm here to moderate a very interesting panel of people. And I will introduce them. So first of all, we have Alexandra Munroe of the Guggenheim, and she's an immensely distinguished, shall we say, cultural interpreter. I think probably the most important, who's trying to communicate what contemporary art means in different cultures. She's had a background that enables her to do this because she was brought up in Japan, speaks Japanese, some Chinese as well, she says. And, not she says, I'm sure she does. And she came to New York in the 1980s and got to know an interesting group of Japanese artists who had been of the Japanese avant-garde, people like Yoko Ono, who'd been somewhat forgotten. She has been working in the team that is the Guggenheim Abu Dhabi team, and is about to do an exhibition, it's about next year, isn't it, on art in China 1989 to 2008. Then Reem Fadda, whom I'm sure many of you know, because you spent a lot of time here, also the Guggenheim team until this year when she took on the Marrakesh Biennale, Palestinian, director of the Palestinian Association for Contemporary Art, and helped found in 2006 the International Academy of Art in Palestine, in Ramallah, and has played a big role in introducing Middle Eastern art, particularly to America, between 2010 and this year, and in 2013 she was a curator of the UAE Pavilion at the Venice Biennale. Then Fabrice Bousteau, who is, we all know, he's been here for 7 years for the various Abu Dhabi Art. We know his hat and his great characteristic look. He's a very famous person in the French art world because he's the editor of Beaux-Arts, which is definitely the leading publication on contemporary art with a large circulation. And he is also, as it were, a curator or a director or a dramaturge, you know, of art events, which is what he's been doing here for the last 7 years. And finally, Tarek Abou al-Fetouh, who's Egyptian, and his mother was a drawing teacher. So from an early age, he was acquainted with the idea of art. He studied architecture, and he is a curator of complex art events. So he was the co-curator of the Sharjah Biennale of 2009, of the Homework exhibition in Beirut in 2013. Time is Out of Joint, which is a very good and very timely exhibition in Sharjah, and is in Guangzhou at the moment. And Lest the Two Seas Meet, another exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art in Warsaw last year. Now, I'm going to ask everybody to answer one very fundamental question, which we, the art newspaper, have been asking everybody after 25 years of our existence, because after 25 years, we still don't know the answer. The question is, what is art for? So, who would like to go first? Alexandra, would you like to go first?
Okay. Well, I would say that's a rather fundamental question, Anna. I'm a historian, so I like to think that there is not one answer to your question, but that art means something different according to different cultures and according to different eras. So you could look at the, Yuan dynasty in China, where the literati ink painting culture really evolved and became very refined. And art for the gentleman was combined with brushwork of painting, the brushwork of poetry, the contemplation of the classics, an instrument or two, and the game of Go. Art was the elegant pursuit of the gentleman in search of a lofty mind, and was considered a reclusive act, not a communal act, but a reclusive act to better the spirit. And you might jump to the founding saint, we like to call it, of the Guggenheim Museum, which is Vasily Kandinsky, who's a Russian-born artist who is really the foundational inspiration for the Guggenheim collection of modern and contemporary art. And in 1912, he wrote the great thesis, The Spiritual in Abstract Art, which became literally the text, the inspirational text for the modern art movement throughout Europe and including in Asia and America. And his idea in conceiving abstract art, abstract painting, was that it was a way to better individuals, and with the betterment of each individual, you had a betterment of society. So it was part of the modernist ideal of a progressive society that was better through the practice and connection to humanism, essentially a humanist pursuit towards a better society, a more enlightened society. And then, you might jump to contemporary art, and you might jump to contemporary global art, which is a lot of what we're seeing here at this fair. A lot of what the international biennials that have spread through the 1990s and into the 2000s. It's sort of the spectacle and phenomenon of our day, what we might call global contemporary art. And I think if we look at a lot of that, what we see is an answer to your question, Anna, that is all about questioning. So many artists today use art to question forms of authority, to question the past, to question the conditions of their present, to question what it means to be an individual in an era of globalization. They're looking at the conditions of their age and trying to form a response that gives meaning to the immense diversity and also possibly the immense collectivization of our contemporary era. So maybe that's an answer. I just want to finish by saying we can't forget the artists. Art is not a disembodied thing. We tend, especially in the context of an art fair, to think of art as a commodity. It's not. It is an imprint of somebody's mind and soul, and it is made to communicate. And I think it's very important as we have our discussion today to remember the artists that make this, that are so essential to our societies, as our poets, as our philosophers, as our thinkers across many different disciplines.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Now, Reem, what is art for? Yes. You have to press it quite hard. Hold it
It's
down.
on. Okay. I wasn't prepared. I was already in my own zone. No. It'll come. Actually, hearing you, Alexandra, talk about it and going back in history is something that makes me think about it. And I always cite this reference of mine, which was a teacher of mine, Susan Buck-Morss, theoretician and a philosopher in her own right, who said to us, there are two things that never change: history and art. And for me, that was very profound to think that what artists, in the broader sense of art, what they make is something that will never change. It's a witness. It's something that really records our time, like history, like an event in history. So for me, that really is something that stayed with me. And we always say that we learn from history. So I took that as another interpretation to think that we learn from art, that we need the accumulation of art to tell us a different narration of history that is very capable, that is very progressive, that has no boundaries, and wants to really, in a creative sense, provide something for people to understand their surroundings in a better way. My experience and interpretation of art in working from within the Arab world, from the Middle East in particular, has been really seeing that, and I would consider myself, let's say, knowledgeable for the 20th and 21st century artistic practices from the region. And I've broadened my horizon to really look at art that is looking at the global south at the same time, because I think there's a lot of commonalities happening from a connected world that has survived a colonial experience, and therefore is providing for something very vital. I feel that a lot of these artists are working from the necessity of bettering their social and political conditions. They really want to be civically present. That is, for me, the very viable art. And it's very important. They will use everything, materials, performances, everything, but it really is a way for them to say who they are politically and socially, and to try to provide a platform for their society to think creatively about these circumstances. Who do they want to be as active members of their society? So art is no minor thing for our region, and it's a better kind of tool in the development of our way of thinking and moving forward. So that would be my art.
Thank you, thank you. Fabrice, to you. Fabrice says he's going to talk English, but every now and again will talk French. So if you put on your earphones, they will translate into English when he speaks French.
I wanted to speak in French because it's easier for me, like for each French, but I will speak in English because nobody of you have some headphones. So, art for me, if I have a short definition, it's what our mind can't express, is that we can't express with some words. Why? I'm really thinking that art is connected to our DNA and connected to the DNA of everything living. I mean, plants, vegetables, animals. I'm really thinking that an art object is just a support for everybody to, in a way, to be connected with our DNA and to be connected with everything living. I really think that when you look at all the history of art in all different kind of civilization, something looking like magic, how 14,000 years ago, some people in some cave succeed to do some representation and some perspective that we discover in the 16th century. It's crazy when you're thinking about art that in so different kind of civilization, you have abstraction very, very soon. You have figurative art very, very soon. From Pakistan to France to Africa to everywhere. So it's something more than magic. It's absolutely linked to DNA. I want to tell you a story. A young guy in the 60s named Jeremy Nerebi. He was a young anthropologist, and he was really obsessed about to understand what is shamanism all over the world. So he came in Siberia, he came in Africa, he came in Latin America, and he wanted to try to understand what is shamanism. And he discovered, for example, that since thousands of years, in all civilizations, they represented snake. And he was speaking about cosmic snake. What is this cosmic snake? For example, in Siberia, snakes don't exist. And you find some representation of snake with, on the back, some strange line. The strange lines are exactly the drawing of DNA. Who discover, we discover, scientists discover DNA and the representation of discover around 1940, 1950. How could you explain that 3,000 years ago in Siberia, in Latin America, we represent with snake the design of DNA, the design of what we are in self. And nobody understands what is DNA exactly. It's very more complex than the more complex computer. Two other last things. A computer succeeds to be the winner with the chess champion in 1996. A computer succeeds to win against the best Go champion. But never a computer succeeds to create something, to create art. I think that art object, when you're looking at an art object, when you are thinking to an object, you take some power to be connected to yourself and to all the living things. I think that perhaps in 1,000 or 2,000 years, perhaps art object will not exist because everybody will be an artist. And not an artist in a social way, in a cultural way, but to have the capacity to express something that we can't express with words. That's art for me.
Thank you. Tarek, what is art for?
So I think I better do it like this because we lost your voice. Yeah, I would actually add on what Reem said about the engagement with the socio-political conditions, and I would take it a bit to a personal experience, I would say. Like, I would turn the question a bit and say, what makes me do this job and love this job, actually? And there are several layers, and I would take it to the general layer that I think artists give us possibilities to imagine the world differently. And this can be the key for changing either political or social, etc. And they offer these magic moments that makes me really want to do this job again and again and again. I can give you a few examples from my own experience. For example, I would give maybe example from here, from Abu Dhabi. Like last year in Durub Tawaya 3rd edition, we had this project called Remote Abu Dhabi that was designed and performed here, produced here. And the artist, Stefan Kegi, and the company Rimini Protocol, they gave us, there are several moments that were, I see Abu Dhabi in a different way. I see the city in a different way. And I also can imagine it in a different way. That was not possible without that. For example, I was very, very afraid to get this project here because I thought, people really don't walk a lot here in Abu Dhabi, and it's 2 hours walk performance. And the way it was done, it was extremely successful. People loved it. And I will give you one example, like one of the scenes, after 1 hour of walking together, each member of the audience listening to the guidance of this artificial voice, saying, turn left, turn right, go into the bus, do this, do that. And then the artist asked us in the bus station of Abu Dhabi to spread out in the station. So we were, as audience, we were 50, in between 1,000 people doing other things. And then suddenly he asked us to gather at gate 5. Actually, the voice turned from a woman to a man and say, oh, don't worry, you'll be together again. And then he asked us to gather at gate 5 or 4, whatever. And then you can see the people immediately were running to the gate, and the feeling of being a group in this city, in this bus station, completely different than their normal daily life. And I a bit disagree with Reem about the history of the history and art, because there are, of course, there are also this official art. Like if you compare the artist who made the graffiti for Hatshepsut, the queen, and the artist who made the graffiti inside the temple of Hatshepsut, there are different kind of how do you call it, level of commenting on the society. Of course, there are two different ways, but that's a big discussion that we can discuss later. And many moments, like when again, I'm going back to the magic moments. When I was attending the first rehearsal of Anna Rispoli performance that you can see tomorrow and on Saturday, and I was on the boat, a smaller boat with her, and she started to, she gave me the first time I listened to the soundtrack, watching the waterfront of Abu Dhabi changing. That was absolutely a magic moment that I said, I really love this. I love this job. I love it. They surprised me. Or I can give many examples through my life that I was so surprised by how artists makes me and make also the audience think about their life, the world, the city in a different way.
Good. Now I have a question. You two, Fabrice and Tarek, have performance, complex works of art that you have created for, or have caused to have created for this Abu Dhabi Art, and all of you have done exhibitions, sometimes very complicated ones like a Biennale. Now, you do this, and then how do you think that your audience is going to respond, or indeed even understand what you're doing? What is the other half of what you do? There's you and your performance, and then there is the public. So what do you think is the link between the two of you? So again, shall we do it in the same order as before? Alexandra, how do you communicate? How do you think you can communicate?
Well, again, I want to break it down and start by saying that I hate the word audience for looking at art, because audience is actually audio, means that it is all of you are my audience now. It means a monolithic collection of people who are listening in a kind of passive way. I would propose that we eliminate that word from museum language or from art language and say it's visitors, because visitors are participants. It's an individual experience we're talking about, not a monolithic experience that is fundamentally passive. So that said, I'd also think we have to break it down, because different projects might aim for to reach different groups of visitors, including children, who are extremely important for any museum, and I'm talking about from the museum perspective. But we also want to reach our peers. We also want to reach academics in order to have our work impact the field of study that we're trying to promote or trying to shed light on. We also want to reach, the quote-unquote general public. What does that mean? Different age groups, So I think a curator needs to prioritize which of their publics, which of their visitors they can deliver most effectively to. And if by surprise they reach a whole group beyond that initial, more strategic group that they were aiming at, power to them. But I don't think that we can necessarily predict how people will receive a work of art. What we're trying to do is stimulate thought. We're trying to stimulate an experience that would lead to reflection, that again leads in Kandinsky's work to kind of some sort of transformation. All curators have mentors, and some of us, Reem, you mentored Susan Buck-Morris, mentioned. I want to mention my great mentor in the museum and exhibition making, which was Martin Friedman, who was the great director of the Walker Art Center, with whom I had the pleasure of working on several exhibitions. And the Walker Art Center in Minneapolis, from the mid-'60s through his entire tenure through the mid-'80s, really was, other than MoMA, the great and pioneering center for presenting modern and contemporary art, really contemporary art, including design, including architecture, including performance, and including film. A really radical, fantastic art center. And Martin would tell me, you know, an exhibition is like theater. It has a beginning, middle, and an end. You have somebody's time for about an hour. It's kind of a journey. You have to make those people laugh. You have to make them cry. You have to give them stuff to think about, not too much. And there might be a protagonist or two or three. So what are we taking away from that? It is a kind of theatrical encounter with objects in space whose juxtaposition becomes magic. You know, it's that, you know, otherwise we just do a solo show, but it's how a curator places objects in relationship to each other and in relationship to the space that becomes this durational experience for the visitor. So I think taking in time is very important, taking in the arrangement and the conversation that the objects will set up among themselves, and then leaving room for surprise, leaving room for the visitor to make his or her own sense of it. You cannot over-prescribe, it cannot be monolithic.
You want to go in? Okay, Fabrice, c'est à vous.
To answer to your question, I remember yesterday a young children, like 6, 7 years, who came just in front of me and said, are you involved in this exhibition? It was in Rebirth. I said, yes. Could you explain me why? It was speaking about the installation of Caderatia. I don't know if you saw it. So you see a room and everything looks broken outside. And when you want to enter inside, you see some beautiful light in dark way, and it's some windows and vitrail that the artist find broken in Lebanon and different kind of country in the world. And the idea of the artist, of Caderatia, is that when something is broken, it's never finished. You always can create beauty with it. So the young guys asked me, why it's broken, why it's dirty? And I said, okay, did you go inside? He said, no. Go inside. And he said, whoa, it's so beautiful. And he called his mother and said, Mom, go to see inside, it's so beautiful. And that's for me the perfect reaction with art and people. I mean that I think that art, the main things of art, he asks you some question. I remember I was a teenager in an old city, in a small city in France, and was not educated in art. When I saw the first time the Pompidou Center, I was like a child. I was 16 years, but I come back at the age of 7 years. When you're a child, you always ask questions. And you think that ask question is a way to reactive your mind. And so, as the children yesterday, I think that when you show art, you reactive your mind. If you have 70 years or if you have 10 years. So that's the first things. And I love the way that our Abu Dhabi is very involved in education. I saw so many children, visiting the art fair. When you see art, you are different. It's a strong effect. Even if you like and even if you don't like. That's not a question of this is beauty, this is not beauty. It's active. Second things, I think like a curator, like you, Alexandra, that a curator has to mix different kind of artworks together to create like a movie. What is a movie? A movie, it's a succession of images who create a story. Yeah. So you have to create a story and to surprise people. But of course, you need also, some curators refuse to give information about the artworks. I'm really opposite about this, this kind of curator. You need to give information because, for example, I spoke about this Kader Attia piece. If you have no information, you are impressed by the outside and the description. You are impressed by inside and the beauty of the color and the light. But when you know the story that it was broken vitriol from Lebanon and different kind of country, and glasses from Palace broken, and that you can reactive broken things. You come back in your home and say, whoa, it's magic. Life could be fabulous. And art learns you that life could be fabulous.
Fabrice, did you want to show a little video?
Sorry?
Your video. Didn't you want to show your video?
A video about my exhibition?
Yeah,
yes, sorry. Yes. I don't know, yes. Can we show the video of Rebirth? So it's a young artist who creates, it's a teaser of the video. I will explain after. So it's just a teaser of a video that lasts 10 minutes will be on the stage outside and you can see also with the movie of Gia, speaking about the movie of Gia with Robert De Niro. Don't miss the movie of Gia with Robert De Niro. It's really a wonderful piece. And this piece of a young artist, for me, expresses exactly what we say about what is art, you know. It's a strange video, it's speaking about rebirths, about landscape, rebirths of culture, rebirths of nature, and it's magic. You don't need exactly to have some explanation. You're just fascinated and say, what's that? And you're thinking.
So who wants to go next, Tarek or Tarek? Okay. I forgot to say, Tarek has done the Durub Tawaya, which is all over Abu Dhabi in these days. So you can show us a bit more of that.
We are back to the audience question, right?
Exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I think thinking about the audience is very, very important for me. I do it all the time. And I can argue for it hardly also. Because I also give you some personal examples. When I was invited in 2009 to co-curate the Sharjah Biennial, it was very special for me because I used to work around the Mediterranean, I would say. I used to work in Egypt, Beirut, Syria, Germany, France, Belgium. But when I was invited to Sharjah, which is normally it's like I'm Arab and it's an Arab country, etc. So it sounds we share a lot. But it was my first time to look at India. It was my first time to look at Pakistan, at Iran. And later, this taught me a very big lesson, I have to say. That at first I enjoyed it because it was the first time I looked with a kind of different geography around me, and also how to communicate what I'm doing to the audience in different ways. Another example, like this year I made an exhibition between Sharjah and Gwangju. It's impossible to deal with the audience exactly the same. If I show the work of an artist from Palestine in Egypt, it's different than I show it in Beirut, than I show it in Gwangju, than in Sharjah. It's absolutely different. Or in Warsaw. I think the context is extremely important. It's not anymore that the center of knowledge focused in 2 or 3 cities in the West. This is past. We are living in a different era. The center of knowledge. Fire, we have to run. I'm sorry.
What was that?
I don't know, maybe somebody is angry that I said
Is this the
Western
performance?
world is not anymore. Sorry.
No, not in this context, my dear. You're surrounded by friends.
Yeah, I mean, we cannot.
Yeah.
We cannot.
It's
It's not Paris, New York, London. It's Tokyo. It's Sharjah. It is Abu Dhabi. It is Cairo. It is Beirut. It's Dakar. It's Seoul, Tokyo, etc., etc., etc. And I think I am defending this position very much. And this position requires lots of effort from us as curators. Because if I'm introducing an artist with a specific context to a different audience, I should make sure they know about the context and not to underestimate that they will understand the context and they will relate to it on a different level. So I think audience very important for the curator. And audience, and it is a story or it's a movie, as you said, that I'm presenting to specific audience. For example, another example, I have been working for the last 3 years on my own research, curatorial research in Asia. So I traveled a lot to Indonesia, I traveled a lot to China. China Avant-Garde exhibition was part of my exhibition in Sharjah and Gwangju. And I wanted, for example, to share this with Abu Dhabi audience. I couldn't do it otherwise. So this is why I'm presenting a Chinese contemporary dance company here, because I met them, I saw their work. And I think I want Abu Dhabi audience to see them. And I learned about Hatsune Miku, the virtual 3D pop singer, and I want Abu Dhabi audience to see it. I have the desire to show it to them. I have the desire to show. I'm so happy when the people come into the boat of Anna Rispoli, and I'm happy, and I have them in my mind when I select the things. I have them in my mind. Also, the context in this case is extremely important. This is why I really encourage you to read the program, the curatorial statement. Of course, I don't dream that all the people will see every single performance I do or in the program. Maybe they see 2 or 3, but I think this is not important. I mean, it's the most important that they read, they understand my idea, even if they don't see the Indian movie that I presented, or they couldn't attend the discussion with the philosopher after the movie. It's not important. I want them to understand that I am giving them, I'm proposing them I'm proposing them something. I'm proposing them a story, and I'm giving, and I want them to see it. I want them to have this experience.
So will you show us a little snatch of your Durub?
Maybe I do it later.
Okay, well, we'll
Yeah.
see if we have time.
Yeah.
I hope we
Yeah,
have.
yeah.
So Reem,
So I don't stop the
Reem, okay,
flow of
communicating.
information. And I was so happy that you mentioned the cave, the drawing of the cave, and the DNA and the computer stimulation from the statement here. And let's talk about it also, because I don't agree with you about the computer stimulation. So if you want a bit of disagreement,
Good.
we can open this
Good.
discussion
I'm
later.
very keen on disagreement.
Audience, I consider myself always as a person who encounters art to want to learn. So I start with myself as the first, as a person who is spectator, a seeker of knowledge, an active participant, and I approach the art in that manner. I humble myself to the point where I don't know, because I understand that the mind of an artist is something that is very unique, and it provides me with a platform for something beckoning me to try to understand his own language. So I come with it in a way that wants to ask the question, right? What am I looking at? What am I learning from that artist? What is he trying to say to me? And I myself try to research a lot, and I try to ask the questions, and I read about the artist, and I read the references to understand further. And I have to say that my experience working with the museum has been very instructive, because it also humbled me from my world of academia, let's say contemporary art curating, but it brought me back to something that is very vital, because the museum really is a place where audiences, where spectators really engage with the art on a day-to-day basis. It's a home for people to come together. It's like it's a house of art, and it receives constantly guests, right? It's like the open forum for that. And I really came to understand that it's not enough to show the art, that you really need to provide that information, because people want to ask the question when they're looking at it. They want to read the labels. They want to listen on the headphones. They want to grab the book. They want to hear the artist speaking. And these are fascinating tools, and they're necessary tools, because people will become more knowledgeable. When I did the Marrakesh Biennial, when I did Emirati Expressions here, I approached it in the same manner. We provided, in Emirati Expressions, we had tons of educational workshops provided. It was labels provided for every artwork. We had the book. We had also the sound piece that, the multimedia guide. Everything was provided for the various ages of audiences to really get the information accessible at point there and then. I think this is something that is extremely necessary. But again, I also want to say that there's something problematic still with art today. And I think it also has to go with the history of the object of art, where because it's on a pedestal, because it's away from you, you think it's unapproachable. You know, there's an aura, and that aura is a problematic. And I would say that we need to break that. As curators, as practitioners in the art, we need to bridge that gap between the active people and the art makers together. I think this is a real dilemma today in art, and it should not be shunned. People feel that that art is elitist, that it's far away from society, and this is a real dilemma. And we should absolutely target that and try to break it down.
May I comment?
We just want to say
Okay,
something
Fabrice.
with what said Reem. I totally agree. And I'm very surprised that, in fact, in some art fair, in museum, we never organize, you know, some talks with just some people, some visitors, an audience, speaking together about some artworks. Say, I like these artworks for this and this, and I don't like for this. And to have a discussion between the audience, between visitors, speaking about artworks. Because I believe they have the same rights than art critics and curators. And moreover, sometimes audience see something in the artworks that curators and art critics don't see. So I totally agree with you, Reem, and I think that we have to give also more audience to the audience. It's what I can mean.
And I have to say that I'm now becoming a very much champion of artists as well who work with people, you know? I mean, that's also, there's something that is on the onus of the artists in terms of their responsibility, which they do beautifully. And they do it like no other does, right? Like, they are capable to go into the neighborhoods and speak to the people. They see things that you don't see, and they speak to people, and they interact with various. So I think, but it's not enough to get to a conclusion. That's what I'm trying to say. You know, like, it's not enough to arrive at the object. Right. There has to be something more. You know, because there's a life on its own for every kind of artwork. So that's what I'm invested in.
I just want to bring the conversation back to the work that's here in the Gateway Project, which is the Gudeshin installation.
Maybe we can see an image.
Yeah, maybe we can
The
put a
Banana
picture
Project.
up.
I hope everybody's seen it.
Could you show the slide of the bananas?
Oh, yes. It's further. Yeah, here we are.
So there we go. So, you know, this is an installation that was created in 2007, actually in San Gimignano at the Continua Gallery, where the Beijing artist Gu Dexin, who has been extremely revered avant-garde thinker and kind of activist within the Chinese art world from the at least the mid-1980s through the 90s and into the 2000s. And what you have here, of course, is this enormous rectangle of thousands and thousands of bananas that is framed, that rectangle is framed by these kind of knockoff
Urns.
marble urns and these kind of faux, kitschy bronze urns on top, pedestals with urns, which are a symbol, kind of ubiquitous symbol for posterity, for majesty, for something that is going to be eternal, a kind of monument, right? And he is contrasting this monumentality with something as ephemeral and as everyday, as common, as global as bananas, and placing it on the floor in a complete mock appropriation of minimalist sculpture. You know, this is a complete reference and critique of artists like Judd, artists like Carl Andre, and the whole myth of the industrialized object on the floor in geometric forms through which the visitor interacts. But what's important about Gu Dexin is he himself was a very serious critic of the commodification of art in the Chinese art world. Very serious critic of the loss of the avant-garde spirit, the loss of this ability, this kind of utopian spirit that he was part of in the late 80s and saw the demise of through first the Tiananmen crackdown, and then the promise of an international market and a promise of being shown in places like the Venice Biennial and all these international exhibitions, and realized ultimately that that is all a kind of defiance. That is a letdown of the fundamental purpose of this pure avant-garde spirit that he was raised to believe in. And he made this work precisely, Reem, to get the audience to eat it, He wants you to not touch the work as an aura. He wants you to say, here's aura, isn't it stupid? Look at this empty pedestal. Throw your banana peel in it, please. And he wants to break down that idea of an artwork as something permanent, as something untouchable, and actually make you digest the work. And in the process, it's also about the vanity of all of us and the vanity of a work of art too. Sure. Because these beautiful bananas come in and they're meant to decay and deform and ultimately become rubbish by the course of the show. And the more I think about this work,
but we're feeding the zoo.
We're feeding the zoo, of course, and Budishin would love that. Yeah. But I want to remind you, he no longer makes art. He has retired to read books, philosophy primarily, swim, and talk with his friends every day. And to him, that is making art in the best possible way.
Yes, yes. Okay. Tarek.
Can I add something also about on what you said? Because of course, once I knew that you would present this piece, of course, I thought, that's really great, because the people then will also get to know a bit about the China avant-garde movement. Yeah. So although the piece was produced afterwards as a critique of the commodification of the Chinese art, but it actually reminds the people who will search a bit, or you present, of course, also, that China avant-garde was a very important movement during a very specific moment in 1989 in China, in Beijing, etc., with the political and social context. Shall I go back to the audience?
Yes,
or
yes.
What do you...
Well, we don't have a great deal of time left, so
yes.
Do you want to show your movie, or do you want to discuss?
No, let's discuss.
Well, perhaps discuss is the wrong word, because I just wanted to, this is a question of great interest, I think, to everybody and to ourselves as well. How do you see the present art scene and the future art scene in the Emirates? Because it's developed so fast, as though each year were 10 years, I feel. But how does each of you see things as they are now and as they will be? A quick analysis.
Quick analysis. I always remind myself, because I was really part of this community for quite a long time now, and I'm very thankful because I really entered into the art community here in the UAE, and I was embraced by many artists, and I've got to know many of them, like Hassan Sharif, who recently passed away, and I've shared many dinners and nice times with so many of them, and I've come to know the history deeply, and I always want to remind myself that there's a longer history, and therefore I'm always cognizant of that, and that is a guarantee for a glorious future at the same time. And I really notice that there is a very vibrant community, I would say now, that is very multidisciplinary, approaching art, design, use, community in an interactive way. I've seen installations by artists that are like Judician, that are from the Emirates, but with a vocabulary that is very unique to the Emirates. Zainab al-Hashmi was one of the artists that both Maisa and I showed at Emirati Expressions, the last one, with a huge kind of futuristic desert-like sculpture, but her sculpture invited people to sit on it, and it was covered with camel leather. So they're using design, they're using ideas that are from the community, they're breaking the tones of what is sculpture, installation, and really bringing it back to the people here. So I think there's much to expect and be open to. Did I say anything wrong as well? Okay.
A parrot.
I mean, I think there's a young and vibrant artist community that is worth noticing and seeing. Warehouse 421 has a fantastic display of young artists. I who come here every few months, was also amazed to see new artists. Munira Sayegh, a young curator, is doing an exhibition, she already spoke to me about a new generation of artists that I've been unaware of. So I think there's so much to look forward to coming out from the region.
Okay. Tarek.
I would add also, I mean, I agree totally with Reem, and I add also one more element of the diversity of the audience here, because it's not actually very easy to find all these kind of nationalities and backgrounds in one place. So it is a kind of a potential of different cities that will produce knowledge and will produce also very specific kind of cosmopolitan knowledge that can be offered to people, either here or in Sharjah or in Dubai, etc. I was really amazed also to see the booth outside of Sharjah Foundation with the number of books and the knowledge that were produced in the last 5 or 6 years. That's a lot, and it contributes. And I can imagine that this will continue in the future, knowing that we are now sitting in Saadiyat Island, the extension, the future extension of the city, and art is part of this extension and urban fabric. We have 2 museums, there is Manarat al-Saadiyat, things are happening, which means it is part of the thinking of the future also.
You know, I remember my first travel in India in 1996, and one of my best Indian friends told me that when he was in 16 years, because I was asking him, what did deeply change for you in India? And he told me, NTM, you know, the music TV. Because NTM was arrived in India in 1992 or 90, something like this. And it was a huge shock for a lot of Indian, and especially for a lot of Indian artists, because they discover another way of music, another kind of image. And so it's the reason why at the beginning, at 2000, a new generation artist arrived in India. I created a huge exhibition in Pompidou Center about this new generation in 2008, and how things could change a lot in a country and change people who just see image, see art, and like TV. So I think that Abu Dhabi, it's a young country in a way in this constitution, but it's a very old country when you're feeling about nomadic, about a lot of things. What's happened I remember last year, I saw like a school of young children again. They spoke English perfectly. They are aware about art and they're visiting the art fair and everything, and they are very young. I really believe that what changed the country is education. I think, for example, Europe was changed a lot after the beginning of the 20th century because of school, because of education, because of the cultural and social program. I think that in Abu Dhabi, it's really crazy when you imagine that this country is really nearly at the center of the world, that he built incredible museum, spent a lot of money in education. Education is very, very strong in Abu Dhabi. So could you imagine that somebody who was born in Abu Dhabi now, what will happen when he will be 17? I'm sure that Abu Dhabi will be very strong internationally with artists, with audience, with actors, etc. It will change the world because I'm sure of this. And if I call my exhibition in Abu Dhabi Rebirths, it's because I was thinking about Renaissance Italienne. So I think strong things will happen, sure.
Inshallah. Yes.
I know we want to move on, so I'm just going to say I agree with what everybody is
Yes.
saying, and I agree with the excitement. I don't come here as often as the rest of you. I was last here 2 years ago, and I've been struck this time how vital and exciting the scene feels, and how many younger Emirati are really dedicated, articulate, committed, and just fluent in this burgeoning culture and community. So I completely support that. I think the future here is very exciting. Obviously, the opening of the Louvre will have an enormous impact on this, and ultimately, hopefully, the opening of the Guggenheim will as well. And I would agree with Fabrice that education is absolutely key.
Well, I wish there was time for some questions, but I can see that there are people hovering to indicate that, unfortunately, there isn't. Thank you for coming and listening. I think this has been an optimistic and a realistic little discussion and presentation of these very distinguished curators. So, thank you.
And don't miss the session with Anna and Julia Payton-Jones at 4 to 5. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.